to seeing that we bring justice to this case and we do it the right way. I remember a time we came into this exact room and you have these tables in front of you that are about, 25 feet long, and they had 3 full tables full of evidence from this case laid out there. And we went through each piece of evidence and we said, how are we going to get this in? Who can we find that can authenticate this document? And we made a list, and every single one of those things they followed up on. They found the way to find a person who could get that piece of evidence in to make it critical to our prosecution. So I just have to commend them. I would echo what Chief said, thanking all these departments that helped us. I would add one or two, the Attorney General's Office for the state of Tennessee. I didn't know what the law was in 1977. If you're going to prosecute a case that occurred in 1977, whatever the law was is what applies. And we went through law libraries to try to find books and to try to find statutes that existed, and the Attorney General's Office was instrumental to us to be able to buckle down exactly what laws applied, what rules of evidence in 1977. So I would like to thank them as well. The big thing is, and Chief Crisp and I, we talk a lot about this, our jobs are unique. We deal with very serious content, and we deal with serious decisions that can take people's liberty away for long periods of time. And both he and I, when we discuss matters such as this and other cases, the goal is always to do the right thing, right? That's what you want to do. You want to do the right thing. You want to seek truth, and you want to seek justice. And I have been asked the question about this case really since yesterday, since he was arrested. How do you charge somebody for double homicide 46 years later? How do you put an 80-year-old man in custody? And my response to that is, if you have the proof and the evidence, how do you not? How do you let these 2 people who were murdered not see some justice in our legal system if the case is there? So, how do you do it? Well, how do you not? Because the Maryville Police Department pursued this case, pursued the evidence, answered all the legal hurdles or made all the legal hurdles that I asked them to do, and the evidence is there. It is our duty and it is our job to seek justice in the court systems of the state of Tennessee. So I thank you all very much. I will say, I do want to say one other thing, and this is important for the media that is here today. I tell law enforcement often that a case is not over when an arrest is made. There is always more investigation to be done, particularly in a case like this. There are a lot of people in our community that may have information related to this case that they didn't know was ever going to be prosecuted. I would encourage those individuals, if you have information related to this homicide of Helen and Maynard Fine, please come forward to us and we would be happy to hear it. In particular, based on our investigation and review of the evidence, there was a young lady who was either in high school or just out of high school who lived with the Fines in the months leading up to the homicide. We have never been able to locate or identify that individual, and we have reason to believe that that individual may have very relevant evidence related to this homicide. So those of you in the Maryville community or the East Tennessee community, if you know of anyone who lived around the Everett area of Maryville around the time of this homicide, and if there is an individual that lived with the Fines, we would very much like to talk to that individual. So please come forward. Please let us know. I cannot thank Chief Crisp and the Maryville Police Department enough. I have dealt with a lot of homicide cases, and across the board, whether the homicide is solved or whether it's unsolved, the profound impact the death of a loved one through criminal activity has on family members, on law enforcement, and on, candidly, prosecutors who prosecute their cases is profound. They are matters that are never forgotten. They make a deep impact on our lives, and the fact that these men and women have dedicated their lives to continuing to pursue justice and truth, no matter how old the case, no matter how cold the evidence, that is a testament to how much these individuals care about our community, and I very much commend them for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, General. And just in closing, I would just like again echo my appreciation to all our partners who assisted us in this matter. Also, I just would tell you that I have spoken with the Fines family. Personally, I've spoke to members of the family. They're grateful for the closure that has occurred up to this part of the process, and it's again just thank our staff for the hard work and dedication they've done in the pursuit of justice in this long, cold case. So, thank you all very much. But if you have a couple of questions, we'll be glad to answer those if we can. Yes, sir.
During the preliminary investigation when this happened in 1977, was Michael Keith Fine questioned at that point?
I would say that Michael Keith Fine was a person of interest in 1977. It was a time later before he was formally interviewed. When you're dealing with a case such as murdering a person's parents, you want to, in an abundance of caution, you want to proceed very cautiously because you don't want, that people would be suffering at that time. So we did wait to a certain time before we actually did an interview with him.
What were some of the information or evidence that came forward a couple of years ago that made you reopen this case?
Well, we have a process here that any cold case we have, we'll reopen that case, take a look at it, see if we can come up with any new evidence that would allow us to move forward. If we can't, then we place it inactive for a while and then come back and reopen it again. So in December of 2020, I was in process of talking to a person, a law enforcement officer who was fixing to retire, and I was going to bring him on as a full-time cold case investigator. And since this was our oldest case and it was a double homicide, we wanted to start with this case. But in December of 2020, the family had reached out to me and wanted to know where we were at on the Fine case. And I said, ironically that you call me now, I said, I'm in negotiations with a person I'm fixing to bring on board, and we're going to reopen all our cold cases, and that being the first one we're going to reopen. So that started the process, and then in May of 2021 is when we actually opened that case up full time and started reinvestigating that again.
Since, we've seen technology change quite a bit from the 70s to now when you reopen the case, how much did new technology play a role into getting this evidence moved forward and finding Michael Keith Fine?
Well, I would tell you that a lot of the evidence that we had evaluated back in the 77 and 1978, as the General Desmond indicated, he told us he wanted, modern science to look at that evidence again. He wanted, people who were alive and could testify to what evidence was collected. So we were able to obtain some additional forensic information from some technology that exists today that didn't exist then, and I can't really comment further in regards to that.
What does it mean to you, since you've been with the department since 77, knowing that this cold case has been solved and you found the person suspected of killing this couple?
Well, it's certainly rewarding, but really the rewarding part goes to the families. We're in law enforcement. We're a tool that assists families most of the time in their worst day. And obviously in 1977 on May the 20th is the worst day for the Fine family. And so I think that the rewarding part is that we're able to do our job and pursue justice and bring the persons that's responsible for such a crime to answer for that, and the families to know that hey, it just didn't end in 1977. That no one's still forgotten.
And to speak further to that, it's not uncommon. Unfortunately, there are a small handful of cold cases that exist in Maryville and Blount County, and every few years you will get a phone call from a family member just checking in. Is anything going on with my loved one's case? Have you all found anything additionally? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is, now's a good time to relook into it. And I think this is a great example to those families that, yes, it's very unfortunate that oftentimes homicides aren't always solved quickly. They aren't always solved immediately, but there is zero doubt that the men and women who are tasked with solving those homicides and bringing those individuals to justice that have committed that murder, they do not give up on those cases. They do not forget those cases. They never will. So this is a prime example of that. And I will tell families when they call me over the next few years, listen, just like we didn't give up on this case, we're not going to give up on your case. I promise they will still look into it. They will keep digging. And you never know when that magic is going to happen, when that stone that wasn't unturned gets unturned, that makes things click. So this is just a prime example of how not giving up on justice is really the mission of law enforcement. And they should be commended for that.
And just a question for you, Mr. Desmond. You had talked about this female who possibly lived in the home with the fines. Do we have any information if they're a suspect in this or just somebody who has more information?
No, they would not be a suspect at all in this, but they are an individual who observed some things in the weeks or months leading up to the homicide that potentially could be very relevant in what the defendant in this case is accused of doing. And while we have some information about the person, we have never been able to positively identify that individual. We do know that they lived at that residence for a moderate period of time prior to the homicide, and that they saw and heard things that are potentially relevant to the homicide. And the person would have only been 18 or 19 years old at the time. So we would very much like to talk to that person if they're willing to speak to us.
Do we know if they're in the Maryville area, East Tennessee?
We do not. Unfortunately, we do not. We know that they were in the Maryville. They went to school in the Maryville area at the time. That's really, other than that, and a nickname which I don't want to reveal just yet to make sure we have the right person. I don't have much more information other than it was a young lady who had either in high school or just graduated high school in 1976, 77, and lived with Helen and Maynard Fine on Everett Avenue for some period of time.
Approximately how many cold cases does the department have, and now that this one's been solved, what is the new oldest one?
We have two that's left. One is a 1980 case. The other is a 2002 case. And I can just tell you that we are actively working the 1980 case that we're going in sequence of the time of these murders. And we have been actively working on that case for a number of months. And we have evidence that we have processed and have sent to laboratories. But at that point, that's where we're at.
Chief has already told me he has another one he wants to go over with. I'm like, fantastic.
And then the family members that you mentioned that have been checking in, are you able to describe their relationship to Michael Fine, if they're siblings, cousins, anything like that?
It's a very small family, and I really don't want to get into that. I can just say they would be a close relative of Michael Fine.
I'd also just like to touch again on this woman who was living in the house. Do we know why she was living with the Fines?
We don't know exactly why, and we learned that information back during the late 70s. We could never establish her completely then. She had already left the area. Because when she lived there was prior to the Fines murder, but we believe that she knows things that could be relevant to us, but we never could locate her then, and we've tried, with all the technology out there today, we've really tried harder to find her, and so far we've not. So the gentleman and I talked, and just by chance, if someone was, if she was watching the news or saw something come up, that it may spur a phone call to us.
Do we know if she was living at the house at the time they were murdered, or was she gone?
No, she was not. She'd been gone several months or several weeks prior to that, at least.
And just one more question for you here. How were you guys able to locate Michael Keith Fine down in Alabama?
We've kind of kept up with Michael Keith Fine for years, since he was a person of interest. So we kind of knew his general whereabouts.
So it was really just staying, like, he was always a person of interest. You just kind of kept a track of where he was going.
We'd just check every now and then just to see if he was still alive, and B, where he was residing.
Is there a timeline yet for when he'll be transported back to Tennessee?
He'll have to go through an extradition hearing there in the state of Alabama. The general could probably speak to.
My understanding is there will probably, his first appearance on extradition will likely be today. If he waives extradition, he could come up here relatively quickly. If he does not waive, it could take, some days or weeks in order to establish extradition parameters. There's a legal process for doing that through the governor's office. So depending on what occurs today or tomorrow, it may be a day or two, it may be a week or two.
Okay. Yes.
Have you found the .38 caliber that was supposed to have been used? That was back in 1977.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that we have recovered the weapon. I can't get into the description of that weapon other than I can say it was a firearm, and we did recover that in 1978.
Are you able to share what his
Not at this time.
So you have a motive, you just don't want to share it right now?
We have suspicions that we know, and I think I can share this in general if I start to get out of my lane.
Just to cover for Chief,
Yeah.
so the rules of professional conduct limit what a prosecutor can say extrajudicially about the facts and evidence of a case. And I've also cautioned Chief that we don't want to taint any potential jury pool. We don't want to reveal any evidence. He has a right to a fair and just trial in court, and we want to make sure that we preserve his right to that. So we do have to be somewhat careful and limited about any facts or evidence that we would go into publicly, if that makes sense. I think, yes, we can establish a motive, but I don't think we should go into the specifics of how we would establish that motive publicly at this time.
Do you remember what month in 1978 the weapon was found?
April, I think.
April 1978?
Yeah.
And do you know why the wife of Michael Fine identified the bodies after they were found instead of him? They were both living in Knoxville, from my understanding.
Yes, and I can't answer that. Okay?
All right.
Well, thank you all
so
again very much.
much.
Yes, we thank you.
Set in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, I'm Avery Jordan with WVLT. We're just finishing up now with a live news conference regarding new details from a cold case dating back to the 70s. This is what we know so far. A Maryville man was indicted on Monday for killing his parents on May 20th, 1977, according to Maryville police. On that day, Helen and Maynard Fine were both found dead in their homes. Both had suffered multiple gunshot wounds. Now, the case sat on the shelf because police were not able to compile enough evidence back then. It sat on the shelf until May of 2021. But in the latest news, a grand jury returned 2 indictments for criminal homicide for their son, now 80-year-old Michael Keith Fine. So this is what we know: indicted on 2 counts of criminal homicide. Victims were his parents, Helen and Maynard Fine. Murders happened on Everett Avenue in Maryville on May 20th, 1977. Case was reopened by Maryville police in May of 2021. So Michael Keith Fine was arrested in Jefferson County, Alabama, and is awaiting extradition to Tennessee. Now, what we learned from the press conference is this is a 46-year-old case. Forensic evidence tied the murder weapon to their son, Keith Fine, who was a person of interest back in 1977. Police are currently looking for a woman who used to live with the Fines. She was 18 at the time. She is not a suspect, but police are looking for information from her. Michael Keith Fine will face extradition, an extradition hearing in Alabama before he faces his charges here in Tennessee. And you can learn more about this if you head over to our app or if you head over to WVLT.tv.